Grandpa sold his house for $1. Then his grandson discovered why 17-year-old Ethan always thought his grandfather was a little strange. Grandpa Thomas lived alone in a beautiful old house that had belonged to his family for more than -1 years. House was worth nearly $500,000. So when Thomas suddenly announced that he was selling it for $1, everyone thought he had lost his mind. Grandpa, you can't be serious. Ethan said. Thomas smiled him completely seriously. Would you sell a house worth hundreds of thousands for $1? Thomas looked directly into Ethan's eyes because the person buying it will understand its value. Ethan didn't understand, neither did his parents, but Thomas refused to explain. A week later, a mysterious elderly woman named Margaret arrived. She gave Thomas exactly $1. Thomas handed her the house keys. Then he hugged Ethan. Remember, he whispered, some promises are worth more than money. The next morning, Thomas died peacefully. Ethan was heartbroken, but he couldn't stop thinking about his grandfather's strange words. Several days later, Ethan returned to the old house. Margaret was sitting on the front porch. You knew my grandfather, Ethan. A sketch nodded. Long before you were born we did. He sell you this house for $1. Margaret looked toward the windows. Because he promised my husband. Ethan froze. What promise? Margaret invited him inside. She led him to an old bedroom that Ethan had never been allowed to enter. On the wall hung a faded photograph of two young men. Only was Grandpa Thomas. The other was a man Ethan had never seen before. Whoa, is that Ethan? Has scared me. Husband Daniel. Margaret explained that Thomas and Daniel had been best friends when they were young. They had dreamed of building businesses together, but Daniel came from a poor family and couldn't afford college. Thomas secretly worked 2 jobs and paid Daniel's tuition. Daniel eventually became a successful engineer, but just before he died, Daniel made Thomas promise one thing: if my wife ever loses her home, protect her. Years passed. Thomas never forgot Margaret had recently lost almost everything after a financial disaster. She was about to become homeless. Thomas knew he could sell his house for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Instead, he gave it to Margaret for $1. Ethan's dead at the floor, so Grandpa gave away his entire house just to keep a promise. Margaret nodded. Told me that money disappears. Promise. Ethan wiped away a tear, but then Margaret handed him an envelope. This is for you. Inside was a letter written by Thomas. Ethan, if you're reading this, you probably think I was foolish for giving away the house, but I want you to understand something. A person isn't measured by what he owns, is measured by what he is willing to give when nobody is forcing him to give. E.T. could have left you a house. Instead, I hope I've left you something more valuable. At the bottom of the letter was one final sentence: never become rich by becoming poor in your heart. Ethan couldn't stop crying. For the first time, he understood his grandfather. Thomas hadn't lost his fortune, he had chosen what his fortune was worth. Years later, Ethan became a successful businessman. People admired him for his wealth, but he became famous for something else. Every year, he secretly paid college tuition for students who couldn't afford it. When reporters asked why he did it, Ethan always gave the same answer: my grandfather taught me that the greatest inheritance isn't property or money. He would pause. Ethan smiled at learning how to be the kind of person your family would be proud of.